Hello everyone, discussing hygiene habits of women during Old Kingdom Egypt is today's video. Did you know that women in ancient Egypt used animal fats and oils not just for beauty but to cover up layers of dirt and grime they couldn't wash off? They applied thick layers of mineral powders to their skin, including malachite and red ochre, to give their skin a radiant glow. Yet these same powders cause infections, irritation, and skin damage. To maintain their hair, they used beeswax and oils, but even with these efforts, lice infestations were common. In a world without modern sanitation, they relied on what little resources they had: river water filled with parasites, dust-filled air, and clothing that trapped sweat and dirt. It was a daily battle just to stay clean, and many of their methods would horrify us today. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, which is now Egypt, holds the secrets of this fascinating yet shocking past. Let's uncover the truth in this video. The sun had barely risen above the horizon of the Nile, yet the heat had already begun to creep into the narrow mud brick streets. The air shimmered with the faint scent of river water dust and something far less pleasant, an earthy, musky odor that clung stubbornly to everything it touched. She rose from her woven mat, the fibers stiff with sweat from the night before. Around her, the small, dimly lit chamber seemed to exhale a mixture of smoke from last night's oil lamp, lingering body heat, and the faint rancid tang of oils rubbed into the skin days earlier. In this time, in this place, such scents were neither shameful nor unusual. They were a fact of life, a constant presence woven into the fabric of daily existence. She reached for a linen garment lying crumpled near the wall. Its once white threads had taken on the pale beige of dust, stiff in certain places where sweat and oil had dried into the weave. Without a thought, she shook it gently, sending a small cloud of fine particles into the warm air, and draped it loosely over her body. Outside, voices were beginning to stir, the low hum of neighbors exchanging early greetings, the shuffle of feet across the packed earth, the bleating of goats being led toward the banks. But before she could step out into the waking village, there was a ritual to be performed. On a small clay shelf sat a squat jar, its surface stained dark from years of repeated use. She opened it, and the sharp, almost sour aroma of rendered animal fat rose to meet her. With practiced fingers, she scooped a small lump of the greasy substance and began smoothing it over her arms and neck. The fat, mixed with crushed herbs and bits of fragrant resin, was meant to protect her skin from the burning sun and the biting desert winds. It was also, in the eyes of her people, a mark of care and beauty, yet to the modern nose it was an assault, thick, cloying, and ever so slightly spoiled in the heat. Flies, sensing the fresh layer of scent, hovered briefly near her shoulders before drifting away toward more tempting morsels. She did not wash before this application, for water was precious and rarely used for bathing. A few handfuls might be splashed on the face and hands after a day's work, but a full immersion was an indulgence reserved for the wealthy or the devout. In her world, the river was a giver of life and a bearer of sickness. Its muddy waters could refresh, but they could also bring unseen ailments. And so instead of washing away yesterday's sweat, it was common to mask it layer upon layer until skin and garment alike carried the complex perfume of daily survival. From a nearby corner, she took a small pouch made of woven reed. Inside were tiny chips of a hardened dark brown resin, brittle to the touch. She pressed one between her teeth and began to chew slowly. The resin released a bittersweet flavor, flooding her mouth with its pungent oils. To her, it was a cleansing habit, one that freshened breath and pleased the senses. To an outsider, the thought of chewing something scraped from a tree trunk, perhaps sticky with dust from the market, might seem strange, even unpleasant. Yet here in the heart of the Old Kingdom, it was a gesture of refinement. Her hair, heavy and slightly oily from the same animal fat, was bound with a narrow strip of linen. Stray strands clung to her temples, where the morning heat had already coaxed a light sheen of moisture. She had not combed it thoroughly in days, perhaps longer. In this dry land, lice and grit were constant companions, and the scented oils were believed to keep them at bay. Whether this belief was true mattered little. The ritual was old, passed down, and it endured. As she stepped into the street, the mingled smells of the village embraced her like a familiar cloak. There was the sharp tang of goat dung baking in the morning sun, the faint sweetness of bread dough rising somewhere nearby, and beneath it all, the warm human scent of unwashed bodies moving through the day. No one flinched. No one frowned. This was the air they had always breathed. Yet, one might wonder, standing there, with the sun climbing higher and the heat pressing closer, did they not feel the weight of this ever-present film on skin and cloth? Did they not long for the cool relief of clean water, the lightness of fresh garments, or perhaps the truth is simpler? that in a world where such comforts were rare, they never thought to miss them. This was life, this was beauty, this was survival, and in the Old Kingdom it was enough. In the days of the Old Kingdom, life along the Nile was shaped as much by the river's rhythm as by the rigid hierarchy of its people. The society was layered like the stones of a pyramid at the peak stood. The pharaoh, believed to be the living embodiment of a god, below him the high priests and nobles who controlled the flow of grain, gold, and decree. Beneath them, skilled artisans and scribes who gave shape to temples and recorded the will of the state. And at the broadest base, the farmers, laborers, and servants who worked the fields, baked the bread, and carried the weight of daily survival. Women existed within every layer, their lives defined not only by their birth, but also by the customs and beliefs that bound the kingdom together. For many women, their roles were rooted in the home, tending to the household shrine, grinding grain for bread, weaving linen, and caring for the needs of the family. Yet their place was not hidden or silent. In marketplaces, they could be seen trading produce, selling oils, and exchanging gossip that moved through the air like dust over stone. Among the elite, some women managed estates, supervised servants, and wore fine linen garments that whispered of wealth and status. But no matter the class, the realities of the land shaped their days in ways that transcended wealth. The land itself was a paradox, blessed and cursed by the same river. The Nile's annual flood was the heartbeat of the kingdom, bringing dark, fertile silt that renewed the fields and fed the people. But the blessing came only once a year, and in between the land was dry, the air thick with heat, and the sun unrelenting. The climate was a master that no one could ignore. In the cool hours before dawn, the breeze might carry a hint of moisture, but by midday the air itself seemed to burn. Skin cracked, lips dried, and sweat instead of washing away. Impurities left a layer of salt that clung stubbornly until it was covered or masked. Water was life, but it was not abundant in the way a modern mind might imagine. Beyond the river banks, clean water was rare and precious. Wells were shallow and often brackish. The Nile could quench thirst, but it also carried invisible dangers, parasites, disease, and the runoff of countless upstream settlements. Bathing in it was a calculated risk, one many could not afford to take often. And so daily hygiene relied less on removal and more on concealment oils to soften the skin and disguise odors, resins to freshen the breath, powders to absorb moisture. For the wealthy, jars of perfumed unguents could be opened at will. For the poor, a handful of herbs or a smear of animal fat had to suffice. Along the riverbanks, life pulsed with activity. Women knelt in the shallows to rinse linen, beating it against smooth stones, their arms glistening in the sun. Nearby fishmongers gutted their catch, letting entrails slip into the current while the scent mingled with the thick smell of mud and reeds. Goats wandered close to drink their hooves sinking into the damp soil. The air was alive with flies, the sound of their wings, a constant undercurrent to the shouts of bargemen and the laughter of traders. Here, cleanliness was not an absence of dirt. It was a balance between what could be tolerated and what could be managed. For those in the higher echelons of society, courtyards might hold stone basins filled with water brought by servants, allowing for a semblance of private washing. Yet even here water was used sparingly, poured over the hands, perhaps over the face, rarely over the whole body. Scent was the true measure of freshness, not the absence of grime. A woman whose skin carried the sweet aroma of imported myrrh was perceived as refined, even if the same skin had not touched flowing water in days. The seasons shaped the rhythm of labor and the pace of life. In the flood season, when the fields were underwater, some women joined the work of repairing nets, weaving mats, or preparing offerings for the temples. In the harvest, their days stretched from dawn until the stars emerged, and the dust of the threshing floor clung to every fold of cloth and every crease of skin. In such times, bathing was less a priority than rest, food, and preservation of strength. The heat, the dust, and the scarcity of resources were constants pressing in from all sides. Yet there was beauty in this endurance. The desert sky blazed with color at sunrise and faded into a darkness so deep it seemed eternal. The river mirrored the stars, and the hum of insects mingled with the distant calls of night birds. In these moments, a woman might sit by the doorway of her home, a clay cup of beer in her hands, and feel the air cooling against her skin, the scent of oil on her hair, the texture of linen against her arms, the faint taste of resin in her mouth. These were not flaws to her, but threads in the tapestry of life she had always known. In this world, the idea of clean was not the modern pursuit of sterility, but a negotiation with the elements. The people of the Old Kingdom lived in harmony with the inevitability of dust, the constancy of heat, and the limitations of their resources. Their hygiene was shaped by necessity, not luxury. And for the women who moved through its sun-baked villages and shaded courtyards, the balance between nature and custom was not merely survival, it was the essence of who they were. Now, before we dive deeper into the next part of the story, I'd love to know where you are watching from. What city or country are you in right now? Drop a comment below and share your location with us. It's always fascinating to see how people from all over the world come together to learn and explore history. And if you're enjoying this journey with us so far, don't forget to show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more intriguing videos. Your support helps us bring more exciting content to you, and we appreciate every bit of it. Now, let's get back to the story and continue uncovering the fascinating history of ancient Egypt. In the Old Kingdom, the concept of the body was not bound to the sterile ideals of modern life. To the women who walked the narrow, sun-baked streets of ancient Egypt, the human scent was not a flaw to be erased, but a truth to be embraced. It was a marker of identity, a sign of vitality, and in many cases, a quiet signal of one's place in the world. The heat, the dust, and the limitations of water shaped a sensory reality that was impossible to ignore. Within it, scent, whether natural or enhanced, became part of how a woman presented herself, much as a garment or a piece of jewelry might. A woman's natural aroma was layered with the traces of her labor, her meals, her oils, and her environment. It was not unusual for the scent of a person to shift through the day, fresh in the cool dawn air, richer and heavier by midday, almost intoxicating in the stillness of night. This natural evolution was neither hidden nor denied. Indeed, many women enhanced it, intentionally blending the human scent with simple, earthy ingredients that turned it into something recognized, even admired. The materials at their disposal were primitive by modern standards, but rich in character. They used resin scraped from trees, myrrh, frankincense, and lesser-known local varieties softened in the hand and pressed into the skin. They crushed herbs into coarse powders, sprinkling them onto hair or clothing. They rubbed animal fat, sometimes perfumed with flowers, across the body to lock in moisture and to carry fragrance. In the heat, the fats would melt, slightly releasing waves of scent with each movement. The effect was not the sharp, clean perfume familiar to modern noses, but a complex blend of body and earth, plant, and skin. Even in the wealthiest households, the scents were far from the laboratory pure distillations of today. They were raw, unrefined, and often carried unintended companions. The resin that lent a warm, woody note might also cling to grit from the market. The oil infused with flowers might over days take on a faintly sour undertone as it aged in the heat, yet these imperfections did not lessen their value. To many, they made the scent more human, more alive. The association between scent and identity was deep. A woman could be recognized by her fragrance alone, a signature built from her preferred oils, the food she cooked, the herbs she stored, and the very air of her home. In crowded markets, such familiarity was almost comforting. You might know a friend was near before you saw her face, the mingled notes of her daily life arriving ahead of her voice. This acceptance of scent as part of the self stood in stark contrast to modern ideals where the absence of odor is often equated with cleanliness. In the ancient world, the idea of stripping the body of its natural aroma entirely would have been strange, even undesirable. Cleanliness was not the eradication of all smell, but the transformation of it into something pleasant, or at least tolerable. It was an art of balance rather than elimination. The practice was not without its costs. The heavy application of oils and resins could clog pores, trap heat, and even attract insects. Certain herbs, valued for their fragrance, could irritate the skin if left on too long. The constant layering of scent over an unwashed body created a dense, lingering aroma that might overwhelm someone unused to it. In the tight spaces of mud brick homes, the air could become thick with overlapping fragrances mingling with the smoke of cooking fires and the mustiness of stored grain. Yet for the women of the Old Kingdom, these drawbacks were accepted, even invisible. Scent was survival. Oils protected skin from the punishing sun and dry winds. Resins masked the odors of labor and heat. The very act of applying these substances was a daily ritual, a way to care for the body in a land where water was too precious to waste. There was also a spiritual dimension. Certain scents were believed to please the gods or to carry protective powers. Myrrh in particular was used not only in personal care, but in temple offerings, its smoke curling upward in a mingling of human and divine. To wear it was to carry a touch of sacredness into daily life, a quiet thread tying the mundane to the eternal. Compared to the precision of modern hygiene, these practices might seem crude, even unsanitary. The modern world demands that scent be managed with soaps, deodorants, and synthetically balanced perfumes designed to erase the body's own contribution before adding something entirely separate. Ancient Egypt had no such separation. The body was not scrubbed into neutrality before being dressed in scent. It was the base note, the canvas upon which everything else was built. If a modern traveler could walk the streets of the Old Kingdom, the experience would be overwhelming. The air would be alive with smells, spices from the market, animals from the pens, the river's muddy breath, and the layered fragrances of people passing by. There would be no sterile, scentless spaces. Every corner, every person, every gust of wind would carry a story told through smell. This intimacy between body and scent created a different kind of relationship with cleanliness. It was not a battle to suppress nature, but a negotiation to live alongside it. Women understood their own scent as part of their social presence. To smell like nothing at all would be to erase a piece of oneself. Instead, the goal was to smell right. Right for the season, right for the occasion, right for one's standing. There was a certain pride in this. A woman whose fragrance was well crafted could leave an impression long after she had gone, her presence lingering in the air as a memory. It was a skill passed down through generations, each teaching the next, which resins lasted longest, which herbs softened the skin, which flowers sweetened the oil without turning rancid too quickly. Even now, millennia later, the traces remain. Archaeologists have opened sealed jars to find the faint ghost of a fragrance still clinging to the vessel's walls. The same resins, the same oil still carrying whispers of a woman who once stood by the Nile, her scent a mixture of her body and her world. To the people of her time, she was not trying to erase herself. She was declaring who she was through the air itself. In the Old Kingdom, bathing was not a daily ritual, but an occasional event woven into life only when circumstances allowed. The scarcity of clean water and the realities of the environment made frequent washing impractical, even risky. For most women, days or even weeks could pass between full immersions. The heat of the desert and the dust of the streets clung to the skin, yet this was not considered neglect. It was a fact of life in a land where every drop of clean water was precious. The Nile, the great artery of Egypt, was the primary source of water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. It was both a giver of life and a silent carrier of danger. Its muddy waters, rich with silt and nutrients, also teemed with unseen organisms, parasites, bacteria, and the runoff of upstream settlements. Bathing in it was both refreshing and hazardous. A single dip could bring a feeling of renewal, the coolness cutting through the heat of the day, yet it might also carry the risk of illness. Those who lived closest to the river often developed a careful balance between necessity and caution, choosing when to enter its waters with measured thought. For many women, washing meant something far simpler than full immersion. A basin of water drawn from the river or a well might be used to rinse the face and hands, perhaps the feet. This was often done at the start of the day or after returning from the fields, more as a symbolic cleansing than a thorough removal of dirt. The rest of the body was tended to with oils, resins, and cloth methods that masked odors and softened skin without the need for constant water use. On rare occasions, a more complete bathing took place. These moments were often tied to special events, religious festivals, visits to the temple, or significant changes in the season. A woman might prepare for such a bath with deliberate care. She would rise early before the streets grew crowded, carrying a small jar of oil and a bundle of clean linen to the river's edge. The air in the early morning was cooler, the light still soft, the scent of damp earth rising from the banks. Kneeling at the water's edge, she would let her fingers trail in the current, feeling the cool rush against her skin. The first splash over the arms was a shock, the second a relief. She might dip a cloth into the water, wringing it out before running it over her shoulders and neck, the fabric pulling away a layer of dust and sweat. If she chose to immerse herself, it would be quick. A lowering into the brown-green current, a brief submersion, and then a swift return to the shore. Lingering too long risked drawing the attention of insects or feeling the brush of unseen creatures beneath the surface. After emerging, the drying process was as much a ritual as the washing itself. She would stand in the sun, letting the warmth draw the water from her skin, then apply oil in a thin layer to keep it supple. The scent of the oil would mingle with the clean dampness, creating a fleeting freshness that would last until the heat and dust reclaimed their place. The linen garment, newly washed or shaken free of grit, would feel light and cool against her skin, a small but noticeable luxury. The infrequency of such baths meant that they carried a kind of weight. They were not only physical refreshment but psychological renewal. To feel the skin free of layers of oil, sweat, and powder was to feel briefly unburdened. Yet this sensation was fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar reality of daily life. By midday, the sun would have drawn perspiration from every pore, and the fine dust carried by the wind would have settled back onto hair and clothing. Among the wealthy private bathing areas could be found within the homestone basins filled with water brought by servants shaded from the sun by cloth or carved awnings. Even then, water was not wasted. A small quantity might be poured over the body, followed by a rub down with oil or scented powder. Such baths were indulgences, reminders of status as much as acts of cleanliness. The poor, by contrast, relied entirely on public spaces. The river shared basins, or even rainwater collected in jars during rare storms. The health risks of bathing in the Nile were well known, even if the nature of disease was not understood in modern terms. Skin irritations, fevers, and stomach illnesses could follow careless immersion. Certain stretches of the river were avoided entirely, especially those near animal pens or busy docks. Some women developed personal rituals for protection, anointing themselves with strong-smelling herbs after bathing or drying thoroughly in the sun before dressing. Whether these methods were effective mattered less than the sense of control they offered in a world where illness could strike without warning. For all its risks, the river's call was difficult to resist. In the height of summer, when the heat pressed down like a physical weight, the idea of feeling water on the skin was almost irresistible. Women might linger at the edge after drawing water for their homes, splashing their arms or soaking their feet as a stolen pleasure. The laughter and chatter that accompanied these moments were as much a part of the relief as the coolness itself. The texture of bathing in this world was nothing like the tiled privacy of modern bathrooms. It was open air, shared space, and constant negotiation with nature. The sound of water against the bank, the rustle of reeds, the call of birds overhead, these framed the act as part of the landscape. Even in its rarity, bathing connected a person to the river's eternal rhythm, the same flow that had sustained the kingdom for centuries. In this balance between necessity and desire, bathing became more than hygiene. It was a conversation between body and environment, a reminder of dependence on the Nile, and a brief return to a state that felt, if only for moments, untouched. For the women of the Old Kingdom, a bath was not a given, but a gift, one that carried both pleasure and peril, and whose memory lingered long after the water had dried from the skin. In the Old Kingdom, the art of caring for the body was inseparable from the use of oils, fats, and fragrant resins. To the modern eye, these substances might appear heavy, greasy, even unpleasant, but to the women of ancient Egypt, they were essential both for beauty and for survival in a land of burning sun and relentless wind. The climate stripped moisture from the skin. With every breath, and the desert air carried fine particles of dust that worked their way into every crease. Without some form of protection, the skin could crack, chap, and age prematurely. The answer lay in substances drawn from animals, plants, and trees, each with its own scent, texture, and purpose. Animal fat was among the most common and accessible. Rendered from cattle, goats, or sheep, it was stored in squat clay jars and used in its pure form or blended with crushed herbs and flower petals. Thick and slow to melt, it created a barrier between the skin and the elements, locking in what little moisture the body could hold. In the cool of morning, it spread smoothly, but under the midday sun, it softened and released its odor, a mix of the base animal scent and whatever fragrant additions had been mixed in. This was not a scent that drifted lightly. It clung to the body and followed its wearer through the day. Plant oils, by contrast, were rare and often more highly prized. Extracted from castor beans, moringa seeds, or sesame, these oils were lighter, easier to spread, and carried their own natural fragrances. Wealthier women favored them for the softness they imparted to the skin and for the way they absorbed into the flesh, leaving a sheen that caught the light. In the right measure, they offered a subtler scent, but they were not immune to the heat's effects. Left in an open jar, they could turn sour, their perfume fading into something sharper and less inviting. Fragrant resins brought an added layer of allure and meaning. Myrrh, frankincense, and other tree saps were imported from distant lands, prized not only for their scent, but also for their supposed protective properties. They could be ground into powder and mixed into oils, or gently heated to release their fragrance before being worked into the skin. When combined with fat or oil resin, gave the mixture a complexity woody sweet, sometimes with a faint bite that lingered in the nose. These mixtures were often prepared in advance, stored in sealed containers, and opened in small amounts to preserve their strength. The appeal of these substances went beyond their practical uses. They were marks of care and refinement, visible signs that a woman valued her appearance and understood the customs of her time. The act of anointing the skin was itself a ritual, slow, deliberate, almost meditative. A woman might sit on a low stool in the shaded corner of her home, dipping her fingers into the jar and smoothing the mixture over her arms, neck, and face. The strokes followed familiar paths, each movement ensuring an even layer, each layer building a shield against the harsh world outside. Yet the same mixtures that protected could also harm. Animal fat, especially if not fresh, could take on a rancid odor that no amount of herbs could mask. Plant oils could attract dust, turning the skin tacky and leaving a film that dulled the natural glow. Resin, if applied too heavily, could irritate sensitive areas, causing redness or itching. And the combination of heat, sweat, and thick oils sometimes created a breeding ground for small skin eruptions, an accepted but unwelcome side effect of beauty. Despite these drawbacks, the habit endured, passed from mother to daughter, reinforced by the climate's demands and the culture's ideals. Even the act of reapplying during the day carried a certain satisfaction. In the heat of the afternoon, when the skin felt dry and tight, a touch of oil could restore suppleness and release another wave of scent. The sensation of fingers gliding over the skin, the faint glisten left behind, was part of the pleasure as important as the practical effect. Imagine her beneath the desert sun. The air is bright and sharp, the light so strong it casts no shadows. She kneels beside a low table, the jar before her open to the warmth. Lifting a small portion of the mixture, she rubs it between her palms until it softens, then begins at her wrists, working upward in steady circles. The sheen spreads across her arms, catching the sun in flashes. A faint fragrance rises, animal and floral, earthy and sweet. As she moves to her neck and face, the heat intensifies the scent, wrapping it around her like an invisible garment. The desert wind stirs, carrying grains of sand that tap lightly against her oiled skin but do not cling. The slickness resists their grasp. Sweat beads at her temples, mixing with the oil and deepening its shine. Her garment lights and loosely woven brushes against her shoulder, leaving a trace of its own faintly dusty smell. Every movement releases another note of the layered perfume she wears, not a single manufactured scent, but the complex sum of body, earth, and craft. In this moment, the boundary between protection and adornment disappears. The oil is not only a shield, but a statement she has taken time for herself. She carries with her the marks of her culture, and she meets the world prepared for its heat and glare. Whether the scent is pleasing or overwhelming depends on who encounters it, but to her it is right. It is the scent of readiness, of belonging, of being exactly who she is in the land that shaped her. In the Old Kingdom, personal hygiene relied on methods that would seem crude to modernize, yet to the women of that time they were both familiar and necessary. Without access to soaps, as they are known today, they turned instead to the materials their environment provided: ash from hearth fires, sand gathered from the edges of the desert, and shells ground into fine powder. Each served a purpose, though none were without their discomforts. Ash was one of the most common cleansers. Gathered after cooking fires had burned low, it was sifted to remove large embers and stored in small clay pots. When mixed with a little water, it formed a thin, gray paste, gritty and slightly caustic. A woman might rub it over her hands or feet to remove stubborn dirt, the fine particles working into the lines of her skin. The sensation was both abrasive and drying, leaving the skin clean but tight, sometimes even flaking. The faint smoky scent of the ash would linger long afterward, mingling with the other odors of the day. Sand was another tool, especially for areas of the body exposed to the elements. In its coarser form, it was used much like a scrub, poured into the palm and rubbed over the arms or legs to loosen grime. Its constant availability made it an obvious choice, but it carried its own price. Too much pressure could scratch the skin, leaving it raw and sensitive under the sun. Even when applied gently, the smallest grains could lodge in folds or pores, creating an itch that persisted long after the washing was done. Yet the familiarity of the method made it a habit, and the fleeting smoothness it left behind was enough to outweigh the irritation it sometimes caused. Ground shells, often from river mollusks, offered a finer, more delicate abrasion, collected, cleaned, and crushed into a pale powder. They were prized for polishing the skin. Mixed with oil, this powder created a paste that could be spread over the face or arms, the tiny fragments catching the light as they worked away at the outermost layer of skin. The result was a subtle sheen, a softness that felt luxurious in a world where such sensations were rare. But even this refinement had its risks. The powder, if inhaled during preparation or application, could irritate the lungs, and the sharpest fragments could create invisible cuts that stung under the heat or when oils were later applied. There were other materials as well. Clay gathered from the banks of the Nile used to draw out impurities. Coarse cloths, dipped in warm water, twisted and rubbed over the skin. Even certain plants with fibrous leaves that could be scraped along the body for a similar effect. None of these methods offered the lasting cleanliness of a modern bath, but each played its part in the cycle of daily care. They were simple, immediate, and drawn directly from the land. The process of using these materials was slow and deliberate. A woman might sit in the shaded threshold of her home, a small bowl of ash paste beside her, working it into her skin in steady circular motions. The texture would shift under her fingers, from wet grit to drying film before she brushed it away with her palm or a scrap of cloth. The sand warmed by the sun would trickle easily through her hands before she pressed it gently against her arms, feeling the rough kiss of its grains as they carried away sweat and dust. With the shell powder, she might take more care, patting it into the skin and moving with light strokes as though coaxing a glow from beneath the surface. Yet for all their practicality, these methods left their mark. Skin treated too often with abrasive substances could become thin, sensitive to touch, and quick to redden under the sun's glare. Tiny scratches could allow dirt or bacteria to enter, leading to rashes or small infections. The dryness caused by ash might make the skin more prone to cracking, and the constant need to reapply oils after such treatments was a cycle that repeated endlessly. Still, these consequences were simply accepted. They were part of living in a place where the elements never relented and where the tools for care were as harsh as the environment itself. Despite the discomfort, there was a certain satisfaction in the ritual. The scratch of sand across the skin, the cooling smear of ash paste, the smooth glide of shell powder mixed with oil all carried the reassurance that one had tended to the body, even if only for a moment. It was a kind of reset, however brief in a day, shaped by labor, heat, and dust. And in the absence of gentler alternatives, these primitive practices were not merely tolerated, they were trusted. In the Old Kingdom, clothing was more than a necessity. It was an extension of the body, a second skin woven from the fibers of the Nile Valley. Linen spun from the stalks of flax was the fabric of choice for nearly everyone. Light and breathable, it offered some relief from the unyielding sun, yet it also absorbed the sweat and dust of daily life with an eagerness that could not easily be undone. Once the fibers had drunk in the heat of the body and the grit of the streets, they held onto it stubbornly. Washing such garments was rare, and when it happened, it was often more of a rinse than a deep cleansing. For most women, the same linen dress might be worn for many days, even weeks before being cleaned. The reasons were simple. Water was precious soap, as we know it did not exist, and the process of washing linen was laborious. Beating it against stones at the river's edge could fray the fibers, weakening the garment's life. In a world where every thread was valuable, such wear and tear was to be avoided unless truly necessary. Instead, women found ways to refresh clothing without full washing. A dress might be shaken vigorously to release dust laid out in the sun to air, or brushed with a dry reed whisk to remove surface particles. Over time, however, the fabric absorbed not just dust, but the scent of the body itself, salt from sweat oils, from the skin traces of herbs or resins used in daily care. In the humid heat that sometimes followed the Nile's flooding, these odors could deepen, taking on a faint mustiness. The smell was not always unpleasant, but it was noticeable, a signature as personal as the wearer's scent. To mask or alter it, many women turned to fragrance. Small pouches of crushed herbs might be tied to the garment's folds, or scented oils dabbed at the shoulders and neckline, allowing the aroma to mingle with the fabric and rise gently as the wearer moved. The texture of well-worn linen was different from fresh cloth. It became softer with use, conforming to the body's shape, yet it also developed a faint stiffness in areas where sweat and oil had dried into the fibers. Under the desert sun, this could create patches of contrasting textures, smooth along the seams, slightly rougher where the garment brushed the skin most often. For the wearer, these changes were simply part of life. For an outsider, they might hint at the long days and countless steps carried within each thread. One might wonder whether the wealthy experienced something different. Indeed, in elite households, linen could be of finer weave, almost translucent, with a cooler, smoother feel against the skin. Such garments were sometimes changed, more often the soiled ones handed to servants for cleaning. Yet, even here, the cycle of wear and refresh was not far removed from that of the common woman. Water still had to be fetched, the sun still beat down, and even the most delicate linen would drink in the body's scent after a few hours in the heat. Fragrance remained the most reliable tool for keeping garments pleasant to wear. The sight of linen garments drying in the open air was common along the riverbanks during certain seasons. Women would spread them across low bushes or flat stones, letting the breeze carry away some of the embedded scents. The act was as much about sunning the fabric as it was about cleaning it. The heat of the day could bake away some odors, leaving the cloth warm and faintly fragrant with sunlight itself. When retrieved, the garment might feel lighter, fresher, though not truly clean by modern standards. There was a certain intimacy between woman and garment in this world. Clothing was not discarded lightly. It accompanied her through work, rest, and ritual. Each crease, faint stain, or softened edge was a record of her days. The mingling of fabric, body, and scent formed a kind of identity, one that could not be separated from her life. Whether wrapped in the coarse weave of a laborer or the fine threads of a noblewoman, the linen bore the same truth. It was both shield and witness, carrying the marks of the person it clothed. In the Old Kingdom, hair was both a mark of beauty and a constant challenge. The desert wind carried fine dust that settled into every strand, while the heat encouraged the scalp to produce a constant sheen of oil. Without the shampoos and conditioners of the modern world, women turned to what they had: oils, beeswax, mineral powders, and the occasional covering to protect or disguise their hair. The care of hair was as much about managing the elements as it was about appearance. Oils played the most important role. Castor oil, moringa oil, and sometimes sesame oil were applied to nourish the hair and keep it from becoming brittle under the sun. These oils gave a rich, dark shine, and when spread along the scalp, they helped in smoothing stray strands and reducing tangles. Yet they also trapped dust easily, so that by the end of the day, a woman's hair might hold a fine layer of grit, giving it a weight and texture that was far from clean. Beeswax, often softened and blended with oil, was used as a styling aid, shaping the hair into braids or sleek waves. The scent of wax mingled with the fragrance of the oil, producing a warm, heavy aroma that lingered long after application. Mineral powders served another purpose. Finely ground malachite limestone or other soft stones could be dusted lightly into the hair, absorbing excess oil and giving the impression of freshness. This technique left a faint residue on the scalp which might dull the hair's natural color, but also gave it volume and a drier feel. For women with especially oily hair, it was a quick way to improve texture without washing. However, the powder was not entirely comfortable. If it mixed with sweat, it could form a paste that clung to the scalp until scraped away. Hair washing itself was infrequent. Water scarcity meant that cleansing the hair was reserved for special occasions or for those with the means to afford such a luxury. Even then, washing might involve nothing more than rinsing with river water and rubbing the scalp with a coarse cloth. This removed some dirt but left behind the oils and waxes that were deliberately applied. In this way, hair was never entirely stripped of product. It was maintained as a balance between cleanliness and protection. For many women, wigs were a practical and decorative choice. Made from human hair or plant fibers, these wigs could be elaborately styled, sparing the wearer from the constant care of her own hair. They also served as a shield against the sun, allowing the natural hair beneath to be kept short or tightly bound. Wigs were sometimes scented with incense smoke or dabbed with oil to give them a pleasing aroma. But like natural hair, they too absorbed dust and sweat. Maintaining a wig required brushing with palm fiber combs and occasionally airing it in the sun, though excessive sunlight could dry and weaken the fibers. Head coverings offered another layer of protection. Linen scarves or decorative headbands kept the hair in place and reduced exposure to wind-blown grit. In elite circles, head coverings might be embroidered or dyed, serving as fashion as well as function. Among working women, a simple cloth tied securely over the head could make the difference between manageable hair and a constant battle with tangles. Yet coverings did not completely prevent dust or lice. They merely slowed their intrusion. Lice were a common problem across all classes. Without chemical treatments, women relied on manual removal, combing through the hair with fine-toothed combs made of wood or bone. Oils were sometimes used to smother the insects, making them easier to extract. This process could be time-consuming, but it was a necessary part of grooming. In severe cases, hair might be cut short or even shaved entirely, particularly in the hotter months, both to reduce discomfort and to start fresh. Shaved heads were often concealed with wigs, allowing the woman to maintain the appearance of a full hairstyle without the trouble of daily maintenance. The differences between classes were most visible in the quality and style of the hair and hairpieces. Wealthier women could afford finer oils, softer wax, and imported resins to scent their hair. Their wigs might be crafted from carefully selected strands dyed and woven into intricate patterns. Servants and laborers, by contrast, often had simpler styles, relying on local oils and wearing their hair in practical braids or buns to keep it out of the way. Yet, the fundamental challenges were the same: dust, heat, and the ever-present possibility of pests. In the quiet of her home, a woman might sit near the doorway in the fading light, unwinding a braid that had been in place for days. The strands would fall heavy, carrying the scent of oil and the faint sharpness of mineral powder. With a wooden comb, she would work through the tangles, the teeth scraping gently against her scalp. Now and then she might pause to rub a little more oil between her fingers and smooth it down the length of her hair, restoring its sheen. Outside, the wind might rise, carrying with it another wave of dust, a reminder that the ritual would soon begin again. In this way, hair care in the Old Kingdom was a cycle repeated endlessly, shaped by necessity and custom. It was not about achieving a state of perfect cleanliness, but about maintaining a manageable balance, one that allowed a woman to face the sun, the wind, and the gaze of her peers, with her hair natural or crafted in the best condition possible under the conditions she knew. In the Old Kingdom, the home was a shelter against the sun, but not against the world. Houses were often built from mud brick molded by hand and left to dry in the heat before being stacked into low, sturdy walls. The material was practical and abundant, yet it offered little resistance to dust, insects, or the slow encroachment of the desert air. Roofs, when present, were made of palm logs laid across the top and covered with layers of reeds and mud. Some were flat and could be used as sleeping or storage spaces, but they did little to keep the heat from sinking into the rooms below during the day. Inside, the spaces were narrow with walls that trapped warmth and air, heavy with the scent of daily life. A typical home for a working woman might consist of 1 or 2 rooms, sometimes with a small courtyard open to the sky. The floor was hard-packed earth, cool to the touch in the morning, but warm and slightly gritty by evening. Dust was a constant companion, settling in corners, clinging to the surface of low stools, and lying in a thin veil across storage jars. Even with sweeping, the fine grains from the street found their way inside, carried by the wind or on the soles of bare feet. Insects were an uninvited but familiar presence. Flies swarmed in warmer months, drawn to cooking areas and stored food. Ants found their way into grain jars despite careful sealing, and beetles lurked in shadowed corners. Mosquitoes bred in nearby water channels, and at night their high thin hum could be heard just beyond the earthen walls. Some women burned small amounts of resin or dried herbs to discourage them filling the room with a sharp, smoky fragrance that mingled with the other odors of the home. The link between this environment and hygiene habits was clear. With dust and insects so persistent, daily cleanliness was less about eradicating them and more about managing their presence. Sweeping the floor might push the grit aside for a short while, but it would return with the next gust of wind. Covering food was essential not to keep it spotless, but to keep it edible until it could be consumed. Clothing and bedding absorbed the sense of smoke, sweat, and earth, and rather than attempting to strip them away entirely, women often masked these smells with the oils and herbs they used on their bodies. The heat inside these small homes could be oppressive, particularly in the late afternoon. Sunlight after baking the mud brick all day seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. Airflow was minimal, with doorways and small openings serving as the only sources of ventilation. This warmth accelerated the mingling of smells, the tang of cooking from a clay hearth, the sweet heaviness of stored dates, the faint sharpness of animal hides kept for later use. Even the scent of damp earth from water jars contributed to the tapestry of aromas. When evening came, the light shifted, and so did the character of the home. Lamps filled with animal fat or oil were lit, their small flames flickering and casting long, soft shadows on the walls. The smell of the burning fuel rose immediately, sometimes carrying a faint sourness if the fat was not fresh. This scent mixed with that of the day's labor smoke from cooking fires, the resin burned to ward off insects, and the lingering odor of bodies that had moved and worked under the sun. In this dim glow, a woman might sit on a low bench, her garments hanging loosely from her shoulders after the heat of the day. Around her, the air was still, the weight of the night pressing in, but the light from the lamp made the space feel contained, almost protective. The hum of insects outside became a background sound, punctuated by the occasional rustle of a small creature moving through the courtyard. She might take this time to tend to her hair, to reapply oil to her skin, or to mend clothing. Each action was done with an awareness of the environment, a silent acknowledgement that the next day would bring the same challenges of dust, heat, and intrusion. For wealthier women, The homes were larger, with more rooms and sometimes a second level. Courtyards might be shaded with cloth awnings and storage areas could be separated from living spaces. Yet even in these more comfortable settings, the realities of the climate remained. Dust still found its way inside, insects still sought food and water, and the heat still settled over everything like a blanket. The difference lay in the ability to employ servants to clean more frequently, to store more fragrant oils for masking odors, and to maintain finer linens that could be rotated more often. The physical closeness of people to their surroundings was unavoidable. In the small rooms, every scent and sound was amplified. The rhythm of daily life, the grinding of grain, the murmur of conversation, the clink of clay pots wove into the environment itself. In this way, the home was not separate from the body. It was another layer of living, sharing in the same air, the same dust, the same cycle of wear and renewal. On some nights when the air was particularly still, the atmosphere inside could become heavy, almost tangible. The combined heat from the day and the burning lamp created a soft haze, and the walls seemed to hold the faint memory of the sun. In these moments, stepping outside into the courtyard brought a sudden relief, the cooler air carrying the sense of the wider world. The dampness of the river, if it was near the spice of cooking fires from other homes, the dry mineral breath of the desert beyond. Yet, even this freshness was fleeting. Before long, the woman would return inside, drawn back to the familiar space that, despite its imperfections, was hers. The homes of the Old Kingdom were not sterile spaces, nor were they meant to be. They were functional, adaptable, and deeply tied to the habits and practices of their inhabitants. Hygiene was shaped by these walls, by the openness to the elements, by the constant negotiation between comfort and necessity. A woman's routines, whether sweeping, airing out clothing, or lighting resin, were as much a part of her home as the mud brick and reed that built it. And in the warm, flickering light of evening, with the mingled scents of the day around her, she lived in a balance between shelter and exposure, finding her place within the unchanging rhythm of her world. In the Old Kingdom, the boundary between health and beauty was not sharply drawn. For many women, the substances they applied to their bodies were believed to serve both purposes at once: protection against the elements and enhancement of their appearance. There was a deeply rooted belief that certain layers of dirt, oil, or residue could act as shields guarding the body from harm. Dust mixed with sweat was not always seen as something to be removed immediately. It was thought to form a barrier against the burning sun, harsh winds, or even the intrusion of unseen forces. This belief shaped habits in subtle but persistent ways. After days of work under the open sky, a fine coating of dust and oil on the skin might be left undisturbed, only masked with fragrant resins or oils. Washing it away entirely could be seen as stripping the body of a layer it had earned through labor and exposure. In this way, what a modern perspective might call grime was sometimes viewed as a natural armor. Beauty practices, too, carried hidden risks. The use of heavy oils and animal fats to moisturize and scent the body could clog pores and trap heat, leading to skin irritations. Thick applications of mineral-based cosmetics such as malachite for the eyes or red ochre for the cheeks were admired for their striking appearance, yet the powders could contain particles that caused inflammation or infection if they entered small cuts. Women often accepted these consequences as the cost of beauty, seeing them as minor inconveniences compared to the social value of a well-presented face and body. Some treatments meant to preserve youth or improve skin texture could have unintended effects. Exfoliating with sand or powdered shells when done too often might thin the skin and make it more sensitive to the sun. Rubbing certain plant extracts into the scalp to encourage hair growth could also bring irritation or leave behind persistent odors. Yet these methods were rarely abandoned. Their long tradition lent them authority, and their immediate sensory effects a smoother feel, a fragrant surface were satisfying enough to outweigh distant concerns. Underlying many of these habits was a spiritual dimension. Cleanliness was not solely a physical concept. It was bound to ideas of ritual purity and the favor of the gods. Certain substances were believed to carry protective or sacred qualities. Myrrh, for example, was valued not just for its fragrance, but for its connection to offerings made in temples. To anoint oneself with it was to draw a little of the sacred into everyday life. Similarly, atron, a naturally occurring mineral, was used in temple rituals and in smaller amounts in personal hygiene. Even if its cleansing properties were incidental, its association with divine rites gave it an elevated place in daily grooming. Religious festivals often included acts of purification, though these did not always resemble modern bathing. Rinsing with river water before entering a sacred space, anointing the skin with oil, or burning incense to cleanse the air were all seen as acts that prepared both body and spirit. For women, participating in these practices reinforced the link between beauty and devotion, between physical presentation and spiritual readiness. The belief that appearance could influence fortune also played a role. A woman who maintained her hair, skin, and garments according to accepted ideals was thought to honor not only herself, but also the household gods and ancestors. Neglecting these duties might risk displeasing both the living and the divine. Thus, grooming was not a matter of vanity alone. It was a form of respect and an offering in itself. At night, in the dim light of an oil lamp, a woman might prepare herself for rest by applying a thin layer of scented oil to her arms and neck. The fragrance rising from her skin was not only for personal comfort, but also a quiet invocation, a way to carry a trace of the sacred into her dreams. If she chose to leave the day's dust on her skin beneath the oil, it was with the understanding that this layer was part of her, a witness to her labor and her resilience. In this world, the line between what was healthy and what was beautiful was blurred, and both were intertwined with the unseen forces that shape daily life. Protective dirt. Fragrant oils and mineral powders were not simply tools of hygiene or adornment, they were part of a larger system of belief, one in which the body was a vessel that needed both care and spiritual alignment. Modern eyes might see only the risks, the clogged pores, the skin conditions, the hazards of unwashed layers, but in the Old Kingdom, these were accepted as the price of living in harmony with both the natural and the divine. In the Old Kingdom, the women of the elite lived in greater comfort than most, yet they inhabited the same climate, breathed the same dust-laden air, and faced many of the same limitations as everyone else. Their homes were larger, their garments finer, and their access to fragrant oils and imported resins far greater. But the fundamentals of hygiene were shaped by the realities of the age. The wealthy could mitigate but not entirely escape the constraints of their environment. One of the clearest differences lay in bathing habits. Elite women could bathe more frequently with water brought in by servants and poured into stone basins in shaded courtyards. These private washings were more thorough than the quick rinses most women could manage at the riverbank. Oils and unguents were applied immediately afterward, not simply for scent and skincare, but as a way to seal in the cooling moisture. Myrrh, frankincense, and other expensive resins might be blended into these oils, creating complex fragrances that lingered through the day. Yet, even with this luxury, daily full-body bathing was rare. Water was still precious, and the act remained something to be planned, not assumed. Clothing also marked a distinction. Fine linen woven so tightly it appeared almost translucent was favored by the wealthy. Its pale color not only reflected the sun, but also signaled status. Pure white fabric was difficult to maintain in a dusty world. Servants were tasked with laundering these garments more often than those of common households, though the process remained laborious and never achieved the freshness of modern washing. Fragrance again played a role. Garments might be stored with sachets of herbs or lightly perfumed with oil to ensure they carried a pleasant scent when worn. Hair care in elite circles involved both skill and expense. High-quality oils were imported and beeswax was refined for a smoother, more consistent texture. Wigs, often made from carefully selected human hair, were styled elaborately and sometimes adorned with beads or gold thread. These wigs allowed the natural hair beneath to be kept short and manageable, making lice control easier. Servants could spend hours maintaining these pieces, combing out dust and reapplying oil to keep the fibers supple. Still, even the most ornate wig could not escape the slow accumulation of odors and fine grit in the dry air. Perfume use was another hallmark of wealth. While common women might rely on the scent of a single resin or locally available herbs, elite women had access to blends created from ingredients brought from far-off lands, cinnamon, cassia, or rare flowers. These scents could mask the smells of sweat and environment more effectively, but they could not erase them entirely. By the end of a long day, even a noblewoman's fragrance was layered with the unavoidable traces of heat and dust. The wealthy also had the advantage of space and privacy in their homes. Larger courtyards allowed for airing out clothing and bedding more effectively. Shaded rooms kept certain areas cooler, slowing the souring of stored oils or the spoiling of animal fat used in cosmetics. Yet insects and rodents were not entirely absent, and dust still filtered in through open doorways and high windows. Servants could sweep and burn incense more frequently, but these were acts of maintenance, not elimination. Despite these differences in resources, the wealthy shared many of the same hygiene challenges as their less fortunate counterparts. Bathing more often did not change the quality of the water, which could still carry parasites or impurities. Wearing finer linen did not prevent the fabric from absorbing sweat and odors. Imported perfumes could not mask every scent in the crowded, smoky air of the city. The climate, the materials, and the lack of modern sanitation meant that even in the most privileged households, hygiene was a balance between appearance and practicality. In the evenings, an elite woman might recline in a shaded room, her garments loose and her hair carefully arranged or covered. The faint aroma of expensive resin would mingle with the more familiar smells of the day. Oil lamps cooked food, and the ever-present dust. She might feel cleaner than most, fresher than the women in the markets, yet she would know that the same air, the same sun, and the same earth bound them all together. In this way, the differences between classes were matters of degree, not absolutes. Privilege could soften the edges of discomfort, but it could not erase the world in which they lived. The women of the Old Kingdom lived in a world where beauty, hygiene, and health were intertwined in ways that often carried hidden costs. Behind the gleam of perfumed oils and the grace of fine linen lay a constant exposure to environmental hazards and biological threats. Many of these dangers were invisible, and their effects unfolded slowly over time, shaping not only daily comfort but also long-term well-being. Skin was the most obvious battleground. The harsh sun, constant dust, and layers of oils or animal fats created conditions where irritations could flourish. Without the knowledge of modern dermatology, recurring rashes or patches of inflamed skin were treated with mixtures of herbs, resins, or mineral powders. These treatments sometimes soothed, but they could also trap heat or block pores, prolonging the problem. Insects attracted by both body heat and the scent of certain unguents could leave bites that became infected in the warm, unwashed layers beneath the skin's surface treatments. The eyes, too, bore the burden of the environment and the era's beauty practices. Heavy kohl applied not just for adornment but also believed to protect against glare and ward off infection could irritate if ground too coarsely or mixed with impure minerals. Dust carried by desert winds settled easily into the corners of the eyes, and without frequent washing, these particles caused redness, tearing, or even more serious infections. Ancient medical papyri describe ointments made from honey fat and plant extracts placed along the eyelids to soothe such conditions, remedies that sometimes worked, sometimes did not. Gastrointestinal troubles were another shadow of daily life. Water drawn from the Nile or nearby canals could be contaminated with parasites invisible to the eye. Even for the wealthy, whose servants fetched and stored water in large jars, contamination was difficult to avoid. Eating food prepared in open-air kitchens exposed to dust and flies compounded the risk. Diarrhea, stomach cramps, and longer bouts of illness were frequent companions, often attributed to the displeasure of a deity or the imbalance of bodily forces rather than microbial contamination. The cumulative effect of these conditions was a constant negotiation between appearance and resilience. A woman might endure a skin rash for the sake of continuing her beauty regimen or tolerate mild eye irritation in order to maintain the dark, almond-shaped gaze so prized in her culture. These trade-offs were not seen as avoidable mistakes, but as part of the natural order. Every gain carried its price. Ancient Egyptian medical texts, such as fragments later known to scholars through the Ebers Papyrus and others, reveal a pragmatic approach to health. While these surviving documents date from after the Old Kingdom, they preserve remedies and practices likely passed down from earlier times. In them, treatments for skin ailments include salves made from ground barley mixed with honey or poultices of crushed beans and animal fat. Eye infections might be treated with a blend of natron honey and powdered minerals applied with a slender reed. For stomach troubles, infusions of certain herbs or combinations of dates and wine were prescribed. Yet these remedies existed within a larger worldview where disease could be both a physical and spiritual affliction. The same ointment might be accompanied by a spoken charm, the belief being that words could strengthen the power of the substance. In this way, medical care was never just mechanical, it was also ritual, blending the tangible and intangible in the hope of restoring balance. Seasonal changes brought their own patterns of illness. The flooding of the Nile, while a source of agricultural fertility, also increased the spread of waterborne diseases. The damp air in certain months could aggravate skin conditions or bring waves of eye infections. Women who worked or spent time near the river were particularly exposed, but even those who stayed within the walls of spacious homes could not completely escape. The connection between hygiene habits and these health problems was rarely framed in the way it might be today. Bathing more often could help with dust and insects, but it also meant greater contact with potentially contaminated water. Oils and perfumes could soften and scent the skin, but they could also trap the very irritants they were meant to hide. Linen clothing was cool and comfortable, but once it absorbed sweat, it became a breeding ground for odors and occasionally skin eruptions. In the evening, under the flicker of oil lamps, a woman might tend to her body with quiet care, massaging her limbs with fragrant oil, dabbing at a sore with herbal paste, or gently rubbing her eyes to ease their sting. These were acts of maintenance, not cures, part of an ongoing cycle that balanced relief with the inevitability of recurrence. Each remedy was a small stand against forces that could never be fully defeated. The physical effects of these conditions could also influence social life. A persistent skin ailment might require a change in clothing style to hide affected areas. Red or watery eyes could alter a person's expression, changing how she was perceived. Digestive troubles could sap strength and limit participation in festivals or markets. Still, these were managed quietly, folded into the rhythms of life spoken of in the same breath as weather or household chores. There was also a resilience in this acceptance. To live in the Old Kingdom was to understand that the body was both strong and vulnerable, capable of enduring discomfort while continuing to work, care for a household, or participate in rituals. Health was not the absence of illness, but the ability to keep moving through it, supported by tradition, community, and the tools available. Over time, the cumulative toll of these conditions left its marks: faint scars on the skin, a slight cloudiness in the eyes, a slower step on hot afternoons. Yet, in the eyes of her peers, a woman who bore these signs with dignity was no less respected. They were simply part of the shared experience, visible reminders of life in a land both beautiful and unforgiving. In this way, the story of hygiene and health in the Old Kingdom is not one of failure, but of adaptation. The women of that era lived within the limits of their knowledge and resources, crafting routines that made sense in their world. The scented oils, the rare baths, the carefully laundered linen, and the herbal remedies all spoke to a desire not just to survive, but to do so with grace. And though modern eyes might dwell on the risks and discomforts within the flow of the Nile and the walls of their homes, these women saw themselves as clean, cared for, and in harmony with the life they knew. Imagining a woman of the Old Kingdom suddenly transported into the modern world is to imagine a dramatic clash of expectations, sensations, and standards. She would step from a land of dust and river water into a reality of running taps, antiseptic soaps, climate-controlled spaces, and fabrics that resist stains and odors. The transformation in her daily life would be as profound as the shift from stone tools to satellites. Her first encounter with modern bathing would likely be a revelation. In the Old Kingdom, bathing was occasionally deliberate and often limited by the availability of clean water. Now she could step under a shower and feel endless streams of clear, heated water wash over her, removing layers of oil, dust, and scent that once clung for days. Modern shampoos and body washes would strip away not only visible dirt, but also the deep embedded residues of her beauty mixtures. Animal fats, plant resins, and mineral powders. The sensation of true cleanliness, free from the faint stickiness she had long accepted, would be entirely new. The clothing she would don afterward would feel like another marvel. Modern fabrics, cotton blend synthetics, or finely processed linen, would be light yet durable, holding color and shape without constant re-oiling or perfuming. Machine washing would eliminate the laborious cycles of soaking and pounding fabric by hand, and detergent scents would linger without the need for costly imported resins. She would find it remarkable that garments could be worn multiple times without acquiring the persistent mustiness of Old Kingdom linen. Her hair, so often treated with oils and bound beneath wigs or cloth, would undergo an equally striking change. A modern hair wash with conditioner and blow drying would leave it light, fragrant, and free of the heavy residue she had carried since childhood. Without the constant application of beeswax or mineral powders, her scalp could breathe and her hair would move naturally in the breeze rather than holding the fixed weight of styling compounds. Water in the modern sense would be more than a cleansing element, it would be a source of safety. In her own time, every drink was a small gamble, each sip potentially carrying parasites or disease. Now she could drink from a tap without fear, taste ice without suspicion, and enjoy fruits washed without contamination. Modern sanitation would remove a burden she had never been able to set aside, the quiet vigilance against the invisible dangers of water. The changes in personal scent would be perhaps the most telling. In the Old Kingdom, scent was a mix of natural body odor, environmental dust, and layered perfumes. Even the wealthiest carried the undertone of their climate and living conditions. In the modern world, she could move through an entire day without the faint tang of sweat, clinging beneath the fragrance. Deodorants, antiperspirants, and breathable clothing would allow her to smell as fresh in the evening as she had in the morning. The impact on her health would be profound. Freed from constant exposure to dust and infrequent washing, her skin would clear of many recurring rashes. Without the grit of desert wind in her eyes or the irritants of impure cosmetics, her vision would be more comfortable. Digestive troubles, once a regular interruption, would fade with access to clean water and refrigerated food. She would experience the energy of a body no longer weighed down by low-grade persistent illness. Yet, she might also find some of the modern rituals puzzling. The idea of washing hands multiple times a day with soap might seem excessive after a lifetime in which visible dirt, not unseen microbes, dictated cleanliness. The sterility of certain environments, a hospital ward, a laboratory, could feel unnerving compared to the earthy familiarity of her own surroundings. She might question why such effort is made to remove every trace of the natural world from human contact. The contrast would also bring a shift in social meaning. In her time, a fragrant body was not just pleasant, it was a marker of status proof that one could afford oils, resins, and the labor to apply them. In the modern world, such scents would be optional enhancements, not necessities to mask the limits of hygiene. The absence of scent could itself be a statement of refinement. She would also discover that beauty standards had shifted. Smooth, product-free hair, unadorned skin, and the clean lines of modern garments would speak of health and sophistication in ways foreign to her. The time she once spent grinding powders, perfuming oils, and arranging wigs could be replaced with other pursuits. Grooming would remain important, but its foundation would be efficiency and prevention rather than constant masking and correction. The deeper change, however, would be psychological. To live without the constant awareness of environmental threats, to drink, eat, bathe, and dress without considering the risk of illness would be a liberation she might not have words for. Modern hygiene would remove not only physical burdens but also the mental weight of perpetual caution. The quiet fatigue of her old life, born of daily compromises between beauty and health, would give way to a freedom of choice. In the end, she might marvel at the convenience, comfort, and safety of the modern era, yet feel a certain nostalgia for the rituals of her past. The scented oils, the warm sun on drying linen, the shared labor of washing days all carried a texture of life absent from automated systems. Modern hygiene would grant her longer health, greater ease, and the ability to remain truly clean, but it would also strip away some of the tactile, communal rhythms that had bound her world together. The contrast would sharpen her understanding of both ages, one of endurance and adaptation, the other of prevention and control. The story of hygiene practices in the Old Kingdom is not just one told through ancient texts or images. It is also a story revealed through archaeology, preserved in the remnants of mummified bodies, artifacts, and the material culture that has survived thousands of years. Each discovery, from the tools used to care for the body to the remains of everyday life, offers a glimpse into the hidden rituals and habits of the women who lived during that time. Mummies, often the most telling sources of physical evidence, speak volumes about personal hygiene practices. Through detailed studies of skin, teeth, hair, and nails, archaeologists and scientists have pieced together clues that reveal how individuals cared for their bodies. The condition of the skin, for example, can indicate the level of exposure to the harsh elements. Many mummies show signs of sun damage with wrinkles and leathery textures caused by constant exposure to the hot, dry desert air. These physical markers are a testament to the environmental conditions women faced, with limited options for protection from the sun's damaging rays. The teeth of mummies often tell a more intimate story about diet and oral hygiene, or the lack of it. Wear on the teeth, along with the presence of cavities or dental infections, reveals the effects of the ancient diet, which was rich in grains and sugars but lacked modern dental care. Archaeologists have found that many women of the Old Kingdom had significant dental issues as the abrasive nature of their diet led to enamel erosion. While some of these dental problems were inevitable, they were also exacerbated by the lack of effective oral hygiene methods, such as regular brushing or the use of toothpaste. Hair, another crucial aspect of personal grooming, has also provided insights into ancient Egyptian beauty practices. The hair of mummies is often preserved remarkably well, revealing the use of oils, resins, and possibly even wigs, which were common among both elite women and commoners. The condition of the hair can also indicate the use of certain substances for cosmetic purposes, such as beeswax or animal fats, which were applied to give hair a sleek, glossy appearance. Yet, the presence of parasites like lice in some mummies points to the persistent issue of infestation despite these efforts at cleanliness. Artifacts uncovered in tombs and homes also offer a window into the beauty and hygiene practices of the time. Small, intricately designed combs, mirrors, and cosmetics jars suggest that women took great care in their appearance even when they had few resources. These objects were often made from materials like wood ivory or bone, showing a level of craftsmanship that emphasized the importance of beauty. Moreover, the presence of various oils, ointments, and perfumes in these tombs underscores how vital these substances were in daily life. Oils in particular were not just for cosmetic purposes, they were also believed to have medicinal properties, helping to soothe the skin and protect it from the elements. Scientific analysis of these artifacts and remains further corroborates the physical evidence found in mummies. For example, chemical analysis of residues found in ancient jars has revealed the use of various plant-based oils and animal fats, confirming the extensive use of oils for both hygienic and aesthetic purposes. Similarly, studies of the residues found on combs and other personal care items show traces of perfumes and oils which were likely used to mask the odors of the body or the environment. Medical papyri. Like the Ebers Papyrus, which contains detailed medical recipes, offer further insight into the health-related aspects of hygiene. The papyri describe a variety of treatments for common ailments, many of which were likely part of the routine care for women. For instance, there are detailed instructions for creating balms and salves to soothe the skin, as well as remedies for treating eye infections or digestive troubles issues that were common due to the environmental conditions and the lack of modern sanitation. These texts, combined with archaeological evidence, reveal a society that was keenly aware of the connection between cleanliness, health, and spiritual well-being. The presence of grave goods such as small jars of oils or perfumes placed alongside mummies suggests that personal grooming was not just a matter of physical appearance, but also had a spiritual dimension. The belief that cleanliness was linked to ritual purity and the favor of the gods is evident in these offerings. Women may have used oils and resins not only to maintain their physical appearance, but also to align themselves with divine order. While modern scientific tools have allowed researchers to gain a clearer understanding of these practices, there are still gaps in our knowledge. Many of the substances used in ancient Egypt are not fully understood, and much of the evidence is indirect, requiring interpretation based on available artifacts and mummified remains. However, what these findings do make clear is that while the methods and materials may seem primitive by today's standards, they were a sophisticated response to the challenges of life in ancient Egypt. In comparison to modern hygiene practices, the methods used by women of the Old Kingdom might seem crude or even unhygienic, yet these practices were shaped by the materials available, the environment they lived in, and the spiritual beliefs that governed their daily lives. While modern advancements in hygiene, from running water to antiseptic products, have transformed our approach to cleanliness, the essential human drive to care for the body and maintain appearance remains unchanged. In the end, the story of hygiene in ancient Egypt is not one of negligence, but of adaptation to the harsh realities of life in a desert civilization. Through archaeology and scientific analysis, we are able to better understand the methods women used to navigate the challenges of their world, revealing a society that was both resourceful and deeply concerned with the intersection of health, beauty, and spiritual purity. The women of the Old Kingdom Egypt, with their oils, powders, and carefully crafted routines, lived lives deeply intertwined with the elements of the world around them. Their beauty practices, their cleanliness rituals, and their methods of coping with a harsh environment were not born of neglect, but of necessity. They used what they had: natural oils, herbs, mineral powders, and their own ingenuity to craft systems of care that could sustain them even in the absence of modern conveniences. As we step back into the present, it's impossible not to recognize how far we've come in terms of hygiene and self-care. Running water, soap, antiseptics, and modern clothing fabrics have all become the standard of cleanliness we now take for granted. We bathe without thinking, use deodorants without hesitation, and wear fresh clothes every day without a second thought. Our lives, thanks to advances in science and technology, have become a far cry from the dusty, challenging existence that the women of ancient Egypt knew. But as we sit in our air-conditioned rooms surrounded by the luxury of convenience and cleanliness, one question inevitably lingers. Are we really so different from them? In many ways, the women of the Old Kingdom Egypt sought the same things we do today: comfort, beauty, protection from the harsh realities of their environment. They used the best tools available to them to maintain their bodies and appearances, just as we do now with our modern products and treatments. In their time, their oils, their wigs, and their perfumes were symbols of wealth and status, but they were also their means of managing the discomforts of their environment. Today, our shampoos, air conditioning, and deodorants might seem like a more sophisticated version of their beauty rituals, but the underlying desire to shield ourselves from the elements, to feel fresh, to look presentable remains unchanged. The real question perhaps lies not in how we differ, but in how we might be repeating the same mistakes under different guises. While we have more knowledge about the science of hygiene, are we truly applying that knowledge in ways that lead to better health? Are we over-relying on modern products, trusting that they can eliminate all our concerns about cleanliness and beauty, just as the women of ancient Egypt trusted their oils and powders to protect them from the desert's dust and heat? Our reliance on synthetic chemicals, for instance, mirrors the use of natural resins and oils in the ancient world. We cover ourselves in products that promise to protect and rejuvenate, but how much do we really understand about the long-term effects of these substances on our bodies and the environment? The women of the Old Kingdom did not have the benefit of scientific knowledge about the dangers of certain ingredients, just as we may not fully grasp the consequences of our modern choices. In both cases, beauty and cleanliness are intimately tied to the products we apply to our bodies. But in both cases, these products come with their own set of risks. Think about the way we approach our own routines. We shower multiple times a day. We scrub and exfoliate. We use lotions, deodorants, and sprays to ensure that we smell pleasant. We cover our skin with a layer of artificial protection that shields us from the outside world, much like the women of ancient Egypt did with their oils. But does all this really lead to healthier skin? Or are we simply masking the natural processes of the body? The constant stripping of oils from our skin, the reliance on chemicals to keep us fresh might be creating an imbalance we are only beginning to understand. And then there's the environmental cost. Just as the women of the Old Kingdom struggled with the elements, dust, heat, and scarce water, our modern world faces its own environmental challenges. We use vast amounts of water to maintain our daily hygiene routines, consuming resources that are becoming increasingly scarce in many parts of the world. The beauty products we use every day, many of which are packaged in single-use plastics, contribute to pollution and waste that affect the planet we depend on. The women of the Old Kingdom lived within the constraints of their environment, finding ways to protect themselves with the materials available to them. Today we have the luxury of choice, but are we using our resources wisely? As we close to this chapter on the hygiene habits of ancient Egyptian women, it's important to reflect on both the similarities and differences between our time and theirs. We are fortunate to live in an age where modern sanitation has drastically improved health and well-being, but we also face new challenges that require thoughtful consideration. The story of ancient Egyptian women and their beauty rituals is not one of primitive practices or neglected hygiene, but of adaptation to the conditions they faced. The same desire for cleanliness, health, and beauty that drove their routines continues to influence us today, but now we must consider whether our modern practices are truly as effective and sustainable as we believe. The story of hygiene in ancient Egypt is not just about the past, it is a mirror reflecting our own time, inviting us to think more deeply about the choices we make and their consequences. In the end, the women of the Old Kingdom did the best they could with what they had, as we do now. But perhaps it's time to ask, as we move forward, are we making choices that truly protect our health, or are we simply repeating history in new ways?